Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Um, Let me start by just quickly sharing my screen. Um, all right. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks so much for giving me a great introduction. To quickly cover some background, I started my career as a software engineer. I got my degree, master's degree at Purdue, and started working at Yahoo as a data engineer in advertising. And that's really where I stumbled upon the product management role. So I took that and made a segue into full-time product management and started working at Tinder in their advertising division. And now I'm in my current role, which is international growth. So in my current role, I try to address product needs across the globe and try and make Tinder have a good product market fit in different markets. I'm super excited to share some of my learnings from launching different products across the world. And I'm also excited to understand what everyone here thinks about international growth, how they perceive it. So before I start, I sort of wanted to give a little bit of context on Tinder. I think it's safe to assume that 90% of the audience today has probably heard of Tinder, if not used it already. But Tinder is essentially an app that helps people connect with each other, match with each other, and chat with each other, meet in real life as the ultimate goal. One of the most
I think she's.
But why is international growth in support over 40 languages? I think it was in 2014 when we finally made our first match in the seventh and final continent. So it was two researchers in Antarctica who matched with each other on Tinder. So Tinder is like truly global. With that context, I think let's dive right into product growth. So as a PM in the growth space, we basically have three different levels of growth. The first is user growth, when you've identified a very specific demographic. In the case of Tinder, it is 18 to 24-year-old singles across the world. Once you've identified this demographic, you try and zone in and try and capture that entire demographic. Or you can think about expanding the demographic to a more diverse audience. The second level of growth is international growth, which we'll mostly be covering in today's talk. But international growth is when you want to expand beyond just your native market and try and capture new markets. And the third and final lever is revenue growth, where your product has already achieved product market fit, and now you're just trying to increase the price because users find your product valuable and they're ready to pay more. Or you want to go the other way and discount your product and make it more affordable to a larger audience. So those are the three different levels of growth you can adjust to maximize the reach and expanse of your product. So why should any of us really care about international growth? We just saw why Tinder cares about international growth. It's got a wide-reaching audience. It wants to keep expanding that audience. But why should any of us care about international growth? And the answer to that really lies first in the macroeconomics of the world. So if you sort of look at the wealth of the world, it's far from evenly distributed. Just looking at the GDP across the world, you'll find that Some markets are better off than others, which means that the user base in these markets has more expendable income to become customers and have the purchasing power to spend on your product. But the wealth of the world is not always static, it's always changing, which always creates new opportunities. So if you look at another macroeconomic factor for a sec and focus on GDP growth in the past 6 to 10 years, then you'll see that there's all these new economies lighting up, which means that there's new opportunities being created and new consumers coming online and having the consumer power, having the expendable income to spend on products. So this kind of goes to speak why companies should care about international growth. And some of these macroeconomic factors go on to also influence the culture that's currently being created, which is highly based on the internet. I think two of the most significant things that have happened over the past 2 years is that in 2019, Mukesh Ambani launched Jio, which brought on 500 million plus of the lowest income group people online. So it's taken us about like 25 years to finally connect almost all adults on the internet. And now that they're online, they've automatically become potential customers for any product that you may think about launching. And the second event, which we are currently going through, is sort of this global lockdown that has forced all of us to adapt technology in ways that we've never been comfortable doing in the past, or we've never thought of doing in the past. And I feel like the next 10 years will probably be shaped by one of these two events. How do these macroeconomic or macro level events help shape our decision making when it comes to international growth? I think when you go ahead and select a market for your product, like you may have launched in one market, you may have launched in Singapore, for example, or Tinder launched in the US, but very quickly outgrew that and became a global phenomenon. So some of these macroeconomic factors help us determine which market should we focus on in order to achieve product growth. Some of the factors that go into making the decision of what's the next market that I should focus on as a PM are obviously macroeconomic metrics like GDP and GDP growth, but that has to be paired with certain other factors like market opportunity. To give you an example, a friend of mine recently started an app that's focused around cricket. Now, given that the US, which has a very high GDP, is not really a cricket loving market, the US would probably not be the market that he should focus on for international growth. So market opportunity is an important factor to pair with macroeconomic factors. Market saturation, for example, if you look at India today, and if you look at the retail space, it's going to be very difficult for you to launch another company that goes head to head with, say, like Amazon.com or Flipkart. So market saturation is another factor to keep in mind. Operational costs. In the tech industry, we are very fortunate to have relatively lower operational costs than some of the old market or old world industries. But still, like imagine you were a product manager for say Coinbase or any cryptocurrency based company and you were thinking of launching in a new market, then you would have all the operation costs of dealing with legal and economic um, rules and regulations, which kind of shoot your operation costs up. And the last factor in this list is the S curve, which really doesn't fit in with all the other factors. But I sort of wanted to highlight this because when Tinder grew as a company, we really used this metric to determine which market we should focus on. So the way Tinder approached international growth was Tinder just launched in all 190 countries and then sort of evaluated this S curve of growth. What does that really mean? So basically when Tinder started, it focused on college campuses across the US and building a user base in college campuses across the US. But what they noticed in 2 months of winter break, when students in college campuses either went back home or international students went back to their home countries or were vacationing in a different country, they noticed that in a span of 2 or 3 months, their user base really went from, say, like 30,000 to 500,000. And that is this exponential growth that you see in the early stages. And once they identified, okay, which are the markets where we are seeing this sort of S curve forming, where are we seeing this exponential growth, then it gave a more focused approach to deciding which are the markets that have somewhat of a product market fit, and we can invest more of our execution time to really boost that curve further. And once this curve starts flattening out, which is I think where we are right now, then again, we focus on more innovation and execute that innovation to grow the product even further. I wanted to give an example of how international growth can be really powerful, for which I looked at the top 25 highest grossing apps in India. And you'll see here that 92% of those apps are not native to the Indian market, which means that there are companies based all across the world that are able to capitalize on the audience, which is based in India, and sort of monetize that audience to grow their products. It'll be interesting to see how this trend kind of changes now that sort of all of APAC has come online and has become very much connected to the internet. It'll be interesting to see how this pie sort of shifts around in the next 5 or 6 years. With that, I'll stop here in case we have any questions coming in.
We have 2 questions. The first one is from Elton. So he asks, what is the biggest challenge for Tinder and the space that they are involving in?
I think there are many different challenges, but if you look at the international space specifically, I think one of the challenges is how culturally different these two sort of halves of the world are. In my experience, the Western half of the world prefers a very simple app experience, where the app is very clean, it has a very focused objective, versus if you look at sort of this new world economy and all of the newer markets, we see that this new world is exposed to a lot more complexity. They're used to a lot more complexity in the app itself. Like super apps, for example, speak to just the level of complexity that this new world is sort of used to. So sort of achieving that balance between those two very different tech cultures is kind of a challenge in international growth.
Great, thank you, Mugdha. Elton, do you want to follow up on your questions? Please just unmute yourself. Okay, if not, the second question is from Mudit. Okay, Elton's mic is not working well. So if you want to follow up, you can type it in chat box. Yeah, so the next question is from Mudit. He's asking, so the y-axis in the previous graph were users?
That's really more of a representation, but yes, let me go back to that. Yeah, so you're right. So this is users over time.
Okay.
All right. Unless we have any more questions, we can move forward.
Okay. Elton, he typed here to follow up on his questions. So he's saying think would be Tinder is for entertainment space, but not sure if Tinder would be useful for businesses, as I have heard some startup SAS related does gain early beta users by swiping Tinders.
That's an interesting observation. I mean, Tinder is definitely more in the B2C space. So I guess my perspective on international growth really comes from a consumer space, and most of these insights relate to the consumer space. I don't think Tinder really serves as a business platform.
Okay, thank you. Another one is from Imbar. He's asking, do you think that due to the situation between India and China, native Indian apps popularity and growth will increase?
Yeah, I think that's sort of like a interesting twist that's happened in the recent past, and it'll be interesting to see how that situation evolves. But it's very likely.
Okay, we'll just take one more questions. This one is from Parampriti. How does Tinder will compete with its competitors like Bumble, in Happy India? What sort of new features you are looking an eye for?
That's a good question. I feel like, Tinder's always sort of been the first to innovate. And there are a lot of competing apps. But I feel like the sort of healthy competition, more than coming from apps that do exactly what Tinder does, would come from apps that sort of think about dating in a completely different way. And that's the sort of competition that, I would really want to look for, and I'd be excited to see, like, is there an app, maybe in the APAC market, that completely rethinks dating and thinks of it from a totally different perspective instead of just doing the same thing as Tinder does.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. We will take questions later.
All right, cool. So now that we've all sort of agreed that international growth is a key area for a product or a business to focus on, and how different factors influence which markets we select for international growth, let's sort of talk a little bit more about, once you've decided to grow internationally, how do you go ahead and achieve that? For that, I think there are two aspects to international growth, in my opinion. The first aspect is sort of achieving the right voice of your product. What does the voice of a product really mean? So if you think about when you heard about Tinder for the first time, maybe you heard about it from a friend, or you saw somebody else using it, or you saw an Instagram ad for it. So a user really becomes aware of your product much before downloading the app or signing on to the platform. So how do you as a PM or how do you as a product owner control this voice of the product or achieve the right messaging of your value proposition through the voice of the product? In order to do that, I think the voice of the product should address three different things. The first is it should be able to address some locally relevant use cases. You should use and leverage brand partnerships in different global markets to give your brand the right boost and the right perception in the user's mind. And the third and key aspect is achieving really good translation. So what do I mean by addressing locally relevant use cases? Let's look at a case study of Gillette, which is a razor company which is owned by P&G. They launched a product called the Gillette Mark III line in 2004 in India. They were really excited about India as a market because their only other competition in the market at the time was this old style double-edged razor. So they really emphasized through their marketing campaigns, the level of sophistication, the aspirational aspect of this new product that they were just launching. But they really didn't see enough of a lift in the sales of their product, despite having all these advantages over the traditional option. And when they started to sort of dig into why that was, they realized that they were making a very basic assumption that just did not hold true in India. And that basic assumption, which they made through their marketing messages, was that everyone in India had access to running water, which was just not the case. So the team from P&G, the team from Gillette, which included their product designers, engineers, they actually went to India and they sat with consumers, went to their homes, interviewed them, and that's when they realized that their product is based on this assumption which was made on the experience of a more global user or even a more urban user in India. And those assumptions just did not hold true. So when they realized that they'd made this sort of incorrect assumption, they sort of went back to the drawing board and they redesigned their product and split it into 3 different product lines, which now also included water consumption as one of the factors in designing the product. And with that, in 2008, they launched 3 different product lines, and which addressed like 3 very different types of users. And that's when they really saw their products take off. So what that tells us is there are some basic assumptions that we as PMs make when we launch a product in a new market, which just may not hold true. So it's important to make sure that you address the needs of local users. The second tool that you have in your arsenal to control voice of the product is great brand partnerships. And one really good example of this in Singapore is Netflix partnering with Singtel, which is the biggest mobile provider in Singapore. So this sort of created a symbiotic relationship between Singtel and Netflix. So all users of Singtel got a 9-month free subscription of Netflix with every line they signed up for. With this, it was mutually beneficial for both Singtel and Netflix because each of them sort of got access to the user base of the other. Plus, Netflix was able to solidify their position as a legitimate and a prestigious brand based on their association with Singtel. So brand partnerships is another really important tool to establish how you communicate your brand and your value to the end user. And the third and final tool in achieving the right voice for your users is just great translation. I think a lot of PMs sort of don't recognize how important this can be, but great translations really make a lot of difference. If your value proposition is really good and you have achieved product market fit, but you can't communicate it through your app efficiently, then it sort of defeats the purpose of putting in all the efforts. And a lot of times, a lot of things can get lost in translation. You know, and this happens because most of us work with third-party translators, and these third-party translators get paid by the number of words that they translate. So their metric really is volume-based rather than quality-based. So lessons from a PM who's gone through several of these meme-worthy moments is that it's upon the PM or the product owner to really provide the right context, the right language, and set the context for like what tone do you want from the translators. I always specify that, you know, translate this piece of text as if you were explaining this feature to a friend of yours. So that's another tool. Just achieving really good translation is another tool you can use to achieve the right voice for your product. With that, I'll move on to the next aspect, which is closer to like traditional product management, which is how do you modify your product? At Tinder, we spend as much time studying the market and really analyzing first, do we need to modify the product, if at all? And if yes, then what exactly is it about the product that we need to modify? So I'd say I spend like half my time studying the market and half my time deciding what to modify. And the three tools that really help me in sort of understanding or studying the market are internet anthropology. So I feel like there are so many resources out there on the internet that we don't tap into. Like me sitting here in Los Angeles, it's very hard for me to imagine what a user, say in Japan, is thinking, how they perceive dating, and what are their expectations from an app like Tinder. So I actually spend a lot of time going through just YouTube channels which are in different languages, reading through Reddit threads, Facebook groups, chatting with people to understand how do they perceive dating per se, and what is their expectation, what's their perception of online dating, what do they expect from an app like Tinder. The second tool is qualitative analysis. So you can use multiple different online surveying tools available to you. If you have a large enough user base and the right targeting tools, you can even send out surveys through your app directly to your users to help answer some key questions that guide your everyday day-to-day decisions. And the third and final tool is quantitative analysis. If you are in the fortunate position of being a large enough company that has enough data volume, then if you're targeting to enter a new market, you can sort of compare some baseline key engagement metrics to your native market and see what are the areas that the new market lacks in. Are users not retaining long enough? Are they not engaged long enough? and then really zone in, focus, and try and improve those areas. A good example of how like internet anthropology helped me build a product that proved to be really useful to some of our users was I was reading through a Japanese Reddit thread, and I realized that users don't really know what like and nope means on the Tinder app. Hopefully, some of you have used the Tinder app and know that if you swipe left, it means you're passing on someone. And if you swipe right, then it means that you're liking this person. But through that Reddit thread, it was like an aha moment for me that this basic assumption that I had made as a person sitting in LA was that everyone knows how to swipe and everyone knows what it means to like and nope someone. So we built on that and we went into a little bit of a qualitative study. So we did a user study in some of our APAC markets, and this confirmed our initial finding because one user actually said, oh no, if I left swipe on this person, I really don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I don't want this person to know that they've been like disliked by someone, which is not what happens on Tinder. So if you pass on someone, they will not come to know that they've been passed over. So that sort of confirmed our initial finding just based on internet research. So this guided our roadmap and the next product that we built, which was a basic swiping tutorial, which was more of a play-by-play sort of instruction manual that helped people really understand what does double opt-in mean. They don't have to feel guilty about passing on someone. It sort of explained to the users what each of our features really did. And we realized that this approach of doing like a play-by-play version of the tutorial instead of just a very simple lightweight version really helped our bottom 20%, with 20% users who would have fallen off the app just because they didn't understand what all of these things meant. And that ended up boosting our engagement and retention. Once you've built a product, the next decision that you need to make is whether to fork or not to fork, which means that do you want to maintain and sort of have a version out there which is specific to each and every single market. In the case of Tinder, of course, we have 190 different markets. So this is just not realistically possible. So the decision to be made there is creating a separate branch of code, which will need resources to maintain it, engineering resources to keep the code, healthy and well maintained. Is it worth the business upside you will gain from doing that? So that's sort of the final decision you have to make once you've sort of built a new product. Or you can go the other way and say, I'm just going to take this product that I built and make it global and just merge it with my original code base. So that is the trade-off that you'll have to make as a PM. With that, I'll conclude my talk by highlighting some of the main takeaways. Firstly, like, why do you care about international growth? The answer really lies in macroeconomic behavior of different markets across the globe, which will help you select what should be your next focus market. The second aspect is controlling the voice of the product by addressing local use cases, using brand partnerships, and having great translations. And once you've decided to modify your product, then make sure you really study the market well, ratify all of your assumptions, and once you've built something, you'll have to make the decision of whether to fork the code or not. Thank you so much for hearing out some of the insights that I had to share. With that, I guess we can take some more questions.
Okay, thank you, Mugdha. I think the next question is from Dinesh. Why do you think new Chinese apps are able to launch and grow so rapidly in foreign markets compared to US apps?
That's a good question. I think we have to go back to really looking at some of the shift that's happened in the macroeconomics and the internet culture. I feel like most of the early evolution of apps that came into place in like early 2000s, mid 2000s came from the US. But now that this whole new economy has come online, I feel like some of these companies are really like more tapped into the local markets and the local tech culture, which is probably why they might be able to innovate much faster. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but some of this is just speculation.
Okay, thank you, Mugdha. Dinesh, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I think that's what, like maybe these markets are more similar to their own market, so maybe they can.
Exactly. Like I was saying earlier, like there's this big difference in sort of the western half of the world and eastern half of the world, to sort of oversimplify things. But just the way users play around with the apps and what they expect out of these apps is a lot more than what the Western market expects.
Yeah, but having said that, I think that they're more aggressive. Say TikTok, right? The way they've sort of expanded, I think they're sort of using marketing as a tool. The way say Travis used it at Uber, right? Like capital to just like get market share.
Yep. I feel like with marketing though, it's sort of always an up. It's always cyclical. Marketing can get you a big boost for a short period of time, but after that, the product, it really has to back up whatever the marketing has messaged out to the users. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether these users retain.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Dinesh. Our next question is from Preet. Considering this new normal times, what are the new features Tinder has built or is building to cope with demand on the app? Or what steps is Tinder taking to cope with the new normal?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's quite a few things coming. I won't spoil the surprise on all of them, but one of the things that we launched just when the global lockdown started was we made one of our features called Passport, which lets users, change their location to a different city or different place. We made that feature free for everyone. And we saw some really interesting results from that. A lot of people really enjoyed that. They felt more connected to users from across the world because everyone was sort of in this, global lockdown together. So that was one of the things we did, and there's quite a few features coming up. So I won't spoil the surprise on those.
Nice, thank you. Okay, next question is from Sarav. Lately, there has been a lot of focus on the negative aspects of social apps, such as their addictive nature, tendency to increase screen times. How does one balance the need for growth user interactions while addressing these concerns?
That's a great question. I feel like it's always sort of this tug of war between optimizing for business metrics and optimizing for user metrics, like what is valuable to users. At least in the space where I work, which is international growth, my team almost entirely focuses on what's best for the user. So I'm sort of in the fortunate position of being able to dedicate all of my, mental energy to thinking about what's best for the user. And that in the context of Tinder would mean getting more success or more value out of the product with less effort, versus having the user spend tons of time on the app and not getting enough value from it. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And folks, if you want to follow up on your questions, please do unmute yourself and you can directly interact with speaker. So the next question is from Elton. Sorry, from Palak. What are the pros and cons of forking and not forking?
So I guess a good example of this would be, say your product was only available in 3 markets. Say your product was, again, going back to my friend's example, a cricket-based app, and your 3 biggest markets were India, Australia, and the UK. Then you could afford to have like 3 different versions of the app that were hyper localized for needs of each market, right? Versus like Tinder catering to 190 countries, it's highly unlikely that we can maintain a separate version for each market. So really the determining factor there is how much effort is involved versus what is the business upside.
Okay, thank you. Next one is from Elton. What's the feature of Tinder with things like Facebook dating in the picture? What's the future, sorry? What's the future of Tinder with things like Facebook dating in the picture?
Yeah, I feel like, in the space of like dating apps per se, it's kind of critical to establish the intent of the app early on, which I feel like Facebook doesn't really do well. It's sort of in this gray area of like, are you here for friends? Are you here for dating? Versus Tinder is pretty well established in its own space. So yeah. So not too affected.
Okay, thank you, Mugdha. And Elton says he does like Tinder, by the way.
Awesome. That's really good to hear.
All right. Next question from Gaurav. Is Tinder have different version in different countries or same version everywhere?
Yeah, so we decided not to like have different forks for different markets. So we have like one global version, but we are constantly like A/B testing, which feature gives more value versus another. So you might find that some users have a few additional features that because they're part of an A/B test. But we've decided not to fork.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Another one from Yash. For Tinder to work well, it should be able to pair up a user with a potential date soon enough after sign up. But a user who finds a match early is not lucrative for the businesses. How does Tinder solve this product dilemma? How to balance revenue per user versus successful matches since sign up?
Yeah, I guess if you have to weigh between like user related metrics, like user engagement metrics versus business metrics, user metrics always take the top priority, because like unless and until users are like satisfied with the product, they won't come back to use it again. So there's no point, or long term it's not beneficial even for the business to skimp on providing value to the users and trying to just optimize for business metrics. So yeah, that becomes sort of the guiding principle, just providing the maximum amount of value to the user in their first experience, so that hopefully they'll come back for their second experience and more.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
I have another one from Ripal. What could be the primary reason that govern whether to fork or not to fork?
I think this question was asked earlier too. It's again the same thing. Just, is there enough of a business upside to creating a separate branch for the code?
Okay, thank you. And I have a question from Aditya K, but I'm not sure what the question is about. Do you want to open your mic and Aditya?
Hey, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mugdha. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, this is my personal experience. I've been on multiple dates, and I think Tinder is a great platform, not just for connecting and meeting people, but also for hiring, because we've hired really good talent, right? So is there? We did. I mean, I've been doing that for the last few years, and that's not intentional. We don't go with the intention. I don't go with the intention to hire people, but then yeah, you have different connects with different people, right? So yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of this app called Chingari, which is an alternative to TikTok in India right now. So are you guys considering to come up with a feature like a Bumble for business?
Not really. In my experience, and I could be wrong about this, but if you were to hire someone, you would much rather have like a list of people, eligible people available to you, rather than going like one by one and deciding whether you want to interview this person or not.
No, yeah. So that's not how it happens, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I agree to your point. What I'm trying to say is, when you're going on a date, I don't go with the intention that, hey, I need to hire this person, right? It's just a normal date. It's a normal conversation, right? You meet people, it works out. You get to know each other really well. And when you talk about your experience, and then you get to know, hey, the other person, for example, my last venture, it was about the content was written by a person, by this girl I met on Tinder, right? I really feel because LinkedIn, of course, is there, but when you have a candid conversation, you're breaking the barrier of being formal, right? And that's one of the reasons I feel, if you guys would want to consider, and I have a lot of case studies on this because of my personal experience, maybe you could chat off and I can just give you some more information on that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like this is a use case that we really haven't thought about expanding on. Would definitely like to connect with you, get to know some of these interesting use cases.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and it was a beautiful presentation. Quite insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Mugdha. We have last question from Dinesh. What's the process of testing an entirely new feature at Tinder? Example like Superlight or Passport.
Yeah. So at Tinder, we really focus on launching every single feature as a test. So we A/B test each and every single feature to see whether it's really generating the type of lifts that we expected. And once we have that, only then do we roll it out as like a global feature.
Yeah, but like my question was, how do you decide if it further complicates the product, or like does it continue to like keep it simple, right? Like that's like a very difficult.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like any feature you launch, it's not a question of whether it's going to be valuable or successful or not. It's just a question of when it's going to be valuable or successful. So given like enough iterations of a product, you can probably make any feature successful. It's a question of whether or not you have the resources to fund further iterations or not. So the idea is to try and get that feature right in the first go. And if you don't get it right in the first go, and by don't get it right, I mean it doesn't create that one KPI lift which you predicted it would, then you have to take the call whether you have the funds to keep going with this or not.
I see. Okay.
With that, I just wanted to quickly send out sort of a thought exercise, which applies some of the things that I talked about in the presentation. And I would also like to get some of you guys' feedback and thoughts on it. So sending it out now, if you all can take like 5 minutes to fill it out, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
Sending it out now. Let me know if you can access this.
Okay.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to reading through all of your responses. It was great talking to everyone. Thanks so much for organizing this.
Thank you, Mugdha. And if we don't have any more questions, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is such an insightful session. Thank you so much, Mugdha. And please do connect with her on LinkedIn if you have any more like thoughts or questions you want to ask. Yeah, Mugdha, do you want to just share your LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, sure thing. 1 second.
Yeah, and before we end this meeting, can I just ask everyone to open up your camera so we can take a big screenshot of everyone who has joined us today? Great. Hello, everyone. Can I get some more? Hey. So happy to see everyone. Happy faces here.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay. Nice. Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna count down to 3. Everyone, 3, 2, 1. Nice. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. The recording will be sent to you shortly after the session. Bye-bye. Thank you.